Folks, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Suzanne Feldman from the Academy of Science of South Africa. Her topic today is raising the bar in scholarly publishing, the role of the Academy of Science of South Africa. Just a brief biography on Suzanne. She was appointed as the position of Director, Scholarly Publications Unit at the Academy of Sciences in South Africa on January 2009. Suzanne is responsible to drive the open science agenda by advocating for the opening up of the entire research process from agenda setting to the dissemination of findings. Raising the visibility, discoverability, and accessibility of South African scholarly journals through open access and online content management, improve the quality of essay scholarly journals, books, and conference proceedings through expert peer review panels in the field. To find ways and solutions to further support the development of policy frameworks in order to facilitate optimal use and access to publicly funded research. Suzanne has received the Electronic Publication Trust, that's EPT, the acronym for that, award for her outstanding contribution to the promotion of open access in developing countries. Early in her career, she started off as an information librarian at various higher education libraries in South Africa, where she eventually was promoted to Assistant Director, Client Services, Library Service at the University of Johannesburg. During 2002, she moved to a national project that we're all quite aware of in the library field called SANLIC, where she was responsible for negotiating access to commercial databases and actively involved in promoting open access and setting up the institutional repositories. She continued this work and in 2006 in an international consortium called EIFL.net in other transitional and developing member countries worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, we actually are greatly indeed privileged to have with us today Mrs. Suzanne Feldman. Please give her a round of applause. Thank you.
Program Director, distinguished guests, thank you very much for this opportunity. Last year, the Academy of Sciences South Africa celebrated its 20 years of existence. And back at the time, just when it started, it did its first consensus study on the strategic approach of scholarly journals in South Africa. And that really gave way to, especially our program, Scholarly Publishing Unit, the Academy, to direct our work over the last 10 years at least. So what I will be talking today is about a next report that we are just about to bring out, which is taking the last 10 years into view and looking what has happened over the last 10 years in terms of scholarly publishing. And then to take stock of what needs to be done more in terms of the next 10 years. The 10 years so far has been quite a difficult journey for us. There were a lot of criticism initially about why is the Academy doing this? Why are they involved in this scholarly publishing? Because what they're doing is actually implementing their own consensus study on scholarly journals as such. So it has been quite a journey. It has been quite a journey for open access in its entirety. Open access has been around for quite a number of years. And when we started, there were a lot of conflict between commercially available journals and open access journals as such. But you'll see in what I'll present with you today is we've come down quite a road, and I think we've had some big impacts and values that we have contributed to the system as a whole. But there's still more work to do, as you'll see as I unpack this whole thing. So as said, in 2006, the report of a strategic approach to research publishing in South Africa was published. And in this study, it actually showed that the journals were very diverse. They were mainly in-house journals. It was mainly authors in a particular institution that used it as a particular vehicle to publish their research outputs. And it actually has a wide history, which I don't particularly want to go into now, because that is an interesting presentation on itself. And that is when the NRF rating system started in 1985. And one of the criteria of a rating is that a researcher has to publish in high quality journals and such, and how that stimulated, rightly or wrongly, the whole publishing outset in South Africa as such. And then in 2005, we had our first DHET research output policy, which governed the research output in South Africa quite heavily and directed the way in which researchers actually published their research output in journals as such. But what was also very interesting is that the primary purpose of the journals at the time was not to communicate and document original research in a global system. And it raised a huge question about the quality of journals, because as you know, the research output policy does not discriminate between international and national journals as such. If you are paid your accreditation unit, it's exactly the same. And that raised a lot of questions in terms of the national journals particularly, because in our study we found that they were really not up to scratch, so to speak. So that posed a problem for the Academy particularly, and how to assist the system to up the quality of its journals over a period of time. The government then requested us to come up with a new strategic framework for scholarly publishing in South Africa. And the Academy came up with 10 particular recommendations as to how can we up the role and the productivity and that scholarly outputs play in South Africa, but also in terms of the global system, what is the impact that it can have there. So just very briefly, we'll look at the 10 recommendations. I think a second study which played a pivotal role, especially in the current research output policy, which came into being in January 2016, was the one on scholarly books as such, to look at what does the scholarly book industry look like in South Africa, specifically towards university presses, which at the time was very frail and competing just to stay alive. And in a way, they're still actually competing to stay alive. But the industry had quite a big impetus by the second research output policy as such. It made a set of recommendations, and these recommendations were accepted in the policy, in the current policy, by the way that there's big emphasis on peer review books and book chapters. That because books are very differently peer reviewed as journal articles, and there's a push internationally towards editors of books, etc., to follow after journal publishers in terms of the peer review practices as such. And it also gave some recommendations on how books should be dealt with when they are evaluated with accreditation. So this particular report also played a major role into the research output of South Africa particularly. So if we look at the strategic objective of the scholarly publishing unit, the first objective is to increase the visibility, the accessibility and searchability of South African accredited scholarly journals. That is our focus. So in terms of our recommendations, we recommended that Cielo South Africa should be established. It is known as the Scientific Electronic Library Online, and for years we actually advocated that it should also be an automatic accredited index, which it is now as from January 2016, which was a major breakthrough for us after the work we've actually done there. So what is Cielo South Africa? As you've heard someone mention this morning, it is actually, we work very closely together with Brazil. We're into a network, so that is South-South collaboration. So we don't only have a north-south view of our journals, but also a south-south view of the journals particularly. So that has been very interesting, because being part of a particular network, an international network, it puts a lot of pressure on us. The journals onto the Cielo South Africa platform has to be of a particular quality. We get evaluated twice a year, and if we don't perform, we can actually be kicked out of the network. So we are always working extremely hard to make sure that we adhere to international standards and in terms of the journals onto this particular platform. So our main focus is global dissemination of open access journals, and the purpose then to increase the visibility, accessibility, indexability, and the impact specifically of South African scholarly journals. So to date, the texts in the Cielo South African Open Access Collection have been viewed more than 9 million times. This is an extremely small collection at the moment. There's 65, and we're just about to add another 10 before March, end March next year. We hope to grow this platform every year by 10 more journals every year. But it's quite challenging because we're not just adding journals as we feel like and as we wish, because we don't want this to be the dumping ground of rubbish. Sorry, it's a bit crude. But we must, because it proves the system as an automatic accreditation index, there are certain criteria and a level of quality that we have to adhere to, because we are working in the system and we have to honor the whole notion towards quality journals as such. So you can imagine that we have very big panels in place whereby they evaluate these journals on an ongoing basis. If journals do not perform on this platform, they are requested to either improve themselves or we remove them from the actual platform. So it's quite serious business as such. We add about 100,000 views are added on a monthly basis to this particular platform. So the growth has been phenomenal, and we are actually amazed to see, just by putting it onto this platform, what it has meant for those particular journals. We have one journal, it's a South African Journal of Civil Engineering. They're still paper-based mainly, but we publish them online on behalf of them. We're almost like a tertiary publisher. We're not even a primary or a secondary. And we've put them onto the platform. And they have grown substantially in terms of their citations, about the manuscripts that they receive, etc. They're now beyond a point where they actually should now start putting other measures in place, because they are flooded with actual manuscripts. So the rejection rate just keeps going up, just to make sure that they at least adhere to their own quality criteria as such. So that's one of our journals that has really proved, for which it was very beneficial to actually join the platform. So to be part of the CLO South Africa platform, what is it that you have to do? Your journal has to be DHET accredited. It has to receive a positive evaluation by the ASAF peer review panels. The journal's full text open access, it must be open, no embargoes, we do not allow those journals. They must publish on time. And you've heard it so many times this morning, and even the international indexes, that's the first criteria when they kick you off from that index if you're not publishing on time. I cannot stress how important this is, and despite of how many times we go around and say to editors, please publish on time, do not deviate. We know that there are some circumstances, but you have to adhere to that, because otherwise you lose your position in terms of international in the international phase of actually being an international journal, and Ina spoke about that this morning. Very important, the articles have to have a digital object identifier, DOIs, and the journal should encourage authors to include their org ID. You can see on your right-hand side, there's a number of badges that we've actually put there. Very important, we support all our journals on our platform for subscription to DOIs. We encourage them to have in their policies that researchers must register their org ID. Because if you just look, if you want to be part of the international world of publishing, the org ID through Crossref actually allows you to populate the profile of an author automatically, and also that openness, that visibility, the credibility of an author is also showcased through an org ID. And that helps any author that wants to submit a particular paper, that he can see that this is really business. This is not just a fly-by-night as such. So we also encourage that. Portico, which is the long-term preservation of our platform, and then our Director of Open Access Journals, we urge our journals to apply for inclusion and indexing by DOAJ. We are progressing very well on that aspect, but there are still a couple that needs to join. And then, of course, the top level of DOAJ is when you have a complete seal of approval, the DOAJ seal, which is really the top notch of being associated with DOA. So what are the advantages of having your journal into the CLO South Africa platform? As we've tried to indicate there, you'll see right in the middle is the Web of Science, the core collection, the Science Citation Index, the Social Science Citation Index, Arts and Humanities, the conference, the books, current chemical reactions and index chemicals. That is part of the core collection. The Yellow Citation Index, of which South Africa also plugs into, sits on the peripheral of the Web of Science. So you can imagine that there's an interplay between the core collection and the Yellow Citation Index, and vice versa. And we've now seen in the latest years that that has also raised at least the profile of South African journals particularly. And secondly, which is very important, is that Cielo South Africa's automatic accredited index for the accreditation of journal output as such. So those are the two most important reasons for being part of Cielo South Africa. I always like to show this particular slide, and I'm not sure if you can actually see it. Can you see it there at the back? This is quite significant. What worries us at the moment is we have not interrogated this particular statistic. It's starting to accumulate there at the back, and every time you visit a journal, and you can do it, you don't need me to do that for you, you can go, this particular journal is the South African Journal of Animal Science, and then it states whom has actually cited the South African Journal of Animal Science. And just look at those titles. All I can see is titles from South America. So that's what I meant about the South collaboration and visibility and accessibility. Now suddenly that we're putting South African journals alongside other South American journals into this platform. This is a huge platform in the Cielo network. I think there's about 12,000 open access journals on that particular platform. And to be part of that network, as said, you cannot just put your journal there. We all have evaluation panels. We all have to report back on an annual basis. Which are those evaluation panels? When did we meet? What did we do? What are the results? We've got to publish our results. We have to state who were the panel members. What are their credentials within South Africa and internationally? So we use the rating system to show them what are the credentials of our reviewers on these particular panels. So it's a major operation for us as a very small organization to make sure that we tap into international standards as such. But this is a very interesting one to see how many citations. If you look at the Revista Brasileira de Zootecnica, sorry, I can't speak Spanish, that's number 2 on that list. 73 times it has cited the South African Journal of Animal Science. You know, and we can go on and we can look at each title on the platform. Some titles are less than this title. So in going forward, we definitely will have to start interrogating what does this mean for this particular journal in terms of its position in global science. We have not even done that before. You might actually wonder, well, what is the incidence of open access journals in South Africa? Well, certainly when we started with the project, it was small. It was only a couple of them around. Every year we have a very large database that we update, and we check the status of all 300 and odd journals, accredited journals, to see what's going on with them. Who's the editors? What's their contact? Are they on the web? Are they not? Do they use an online content management system? What do they use? Are they on Scopus? Are they off Scopus? Are they on Web of Science? Are they not there? And if they have an impact factor, is it up or down? We see if they charge article processing charges, and if so, what do they charge and in what units? And we try and make calculations from that as well. So it's an enormous database, and this is what we get from there. So already, more than half of South African published journals are actually open accessible. Considering where we come from and where we're heading, we think this is quite an impact and a change in terms of how South Africans want to see their journals being published. And I agree with you, Professor Smith, that you said it's most appropriate that we actually have this meeting in this particular venue and not in the Senate boardroom or whatever you call it. Looking at indigenous knowledge, etc., and I think that's the one thing that the Academy actually wants to preserve and to promote and enhance and support is locally published journals. With a big but. There are still many buts towards South African published journals. And in our study, when we release our results, which we hope in January, we will have made that comparison to see, is it still very much homegrown based journals, or have they managed to uplift themselves to a different level? And if they did, who are they? Is it all 300 and whatever? Is it still a certain sector? And I suspect there will be a spread from all the levels, from being really journals up there to still some journals that are still very lowly visible, publish infrequently, are pretty much in-house journals. That's what I expect, and that's what we see out of our results. But this is quite significant for us, so I think for us in the program, we charge ahead. We see ourselves also at the Academy as being the main advocacists for open access, open data, open science, etc. So we push it very, very hard. And right to the end of my talk, I'll tell you why and what's happening in South Africa. I never say this will not be part of the system, is this openness, but a little bit more later so that you can keep yourself awake there. I think we have to ask ourselves in the scholarly publishing environment, what governs us? Because all these measurements being put into place are forcible. They expect, government expects you to adhere to these things. And of course, the first thing is the South African policy on research output. And the things that I want to highlight there, specifically the 75% of the contribution of articles published must be from outside a specific organization. And as much as you as an editor scratch your head about this particular qualification or criteria, so much do we also scratch our head, because we are really uncertain as to how the DHET actually implements this, and at which point, and how do they evaluate that? Because we know that capacity within the department is very low. So we're not too sure as well, and this is quite, that's not good for the system, because we also would like to train and advise, etc. Is it per issue? Is it per volume? Is it over a period of time? And at which point is it only an application for accreditation, or is it at a point where every year they take a journal spot check and see what's happening there? And if so, how do they do that? So that's a very grey area. But I think, putting all the criticism aside, I think the important underlying point in this particular criteria is for articles not to publish only articles from its own institution. It's to be wide and open, to publish the best in the country, to publish the best on the continent, and to try and solicit some contributions from overseas, if we can call it that way. Just to be open and to attract more readers and authors to a particular journal. So I think that is very important, and that is the message that we would like to bring across. Again, with the editorial board, 2/3 beyond a single institution. It's again this openness. Why must it just be people into your own organization? Is it the best people in the country? Is it the best people on the continent? Is it the best people internationally? Who have you involved in the governance of your own journal, and not being as a house journal particularly? And if you look at a house journal, it has its characteristics, definitely. Very important, level 2 only. The Norwegian list is quite a list. It's actually a very large list, and level 2 only is only a small percentage of this large Norwegian list. Level 2, there's no South African journal onto the level 2 list. Very important. Should one apply to be indexed by that list? Well, I'm still in two minds about it, whether that's the best list, whether to apply for indexation, etc., or recognition. I hope you're aware of the NRF Org ID statement. The NRF is moving towards Org ID themselves, whereby if you apply for a particular grant, you will have to apply your Org ID so they can track and monitor your progress and where you've published and what you've done and the amounts being received by your program, your research project. So that is a very significant move from the NRF in what they support. They are currently busy with huge back-end programming to allow for Org ID recognition in all its processes from beginning right to the end. So I just want to say, so if editors start saying, well, you have to have it, there's your governance structure that actually tells you better start pulling up your socks and start participating in this particular policy statement as such. Very important, the NRF statement on predatory journals and deceptive publishers. As the NRF, I can tell you even at the Academy, when people apply for a membership on an annual basis, we have to run some checks to make sure that all the 10 top our research output that they've cited, if it's just, if it did happen, if it's legal, if whatever, like anywhere else, we do find some questionable things, we do. So this is a phenomena starting to arise. In my presentation, I will not actually focus on that. I'm not sure if you've seen the article of Johan Meton from Crest, who published an article in South African Journal of Science about the incidence of predatory and unethical practices in South Africa. That particular data come from our study that he has done on our behalf. We have decided, with lots of consultations with the sector, that we will not particularly focus on predatory and unethical practices specifically, but what we will do is we will engage with the Department of Higher Education and Training to show them where are the incidences and what happens, etc. In my mind, it's not a matter necessarily of predatory practices, then it's really a practice of unethical practices, where an editor will publish in his own journal most of the articles per annum. So that is unethical. And as if you've seen in the actual policy, it states, please do not do it. It is actually prominent and quite clear about that particular aspect. So I think we have another role as the Academy to highlight perhaps unethical practices and to make recommendations in terms of how we can support young emerging researchers or editors of journals to play a particular role in educating the users of unethical practices and what does it constitute. Therefore, quality journals are extremely important, because if you value your journal and you're editor of your journal and you have these policies in place that this will not be allowed, then you already force your end user to actually adhere and to get used to that type of regulations and rules in terms of the system. So it is happening. Did this practices taint South African research? Does it mean that South Africa is actually producing bad research that's questionable? Not at all. It's a small, minute percentage over the period of 10 years where this has actually taken place. But it's there. And I think we need to actually just start some advocacy work here to tell and just be a little bit strict about it so that it does not overshadow the good work that our researchers are actually doing. And I'll show you some statistics just now in terms of how South Africa is actually faring at the moment. Very important, NRF, Statement on Open Access to Research Publications from National Research Foundation, funded research. It's very clear. It says that you have to put your articles into an open access journal. They allow a 12-year embargo period on it. And it also states that you have to put your data sets into an open access repository. It's there, it's real, it says statement, but it's a policy. They are enforcing it. So I just want to say, if you ever thought that South Africa is long not there with open access, I tell you actually, if you just look at the governance structure, the elements are there, and it's tightening up, and it's actually moving towards, I think, a more broader open science policy for South Africa particularly. We had so many questions from editors to say, well, so what does it cost you to have your journal on an open journal system? You talk a lot about this and you have no idea. Do you have any advice for us in actually going OJS? So we were very brave and we set the server up and we put a word out there to say, well, we've got it now. Who are interested to actually have their journals onto our platform? And we're only hosting it and we train. But for the works of it and how it works and the workflow, that is the problem of that editor, its team, that institution, or whoever is involved in that journal. It's not our problem. But what was very interesting at the time is there were 5 journals that were hacked, that lost all their back files, which was in dire need of just something to bring it together to ensure that it continues publishing. These journals have published for quite a number of years, not just a couple of years, quite a number of years, 20 years and more. And we really had to jump in and get our hands dirty, so to speak. You can see there's one, the South African Journal Sports Medicine, South African Crime Quarterly, amazing journal. It publishes crime statistics and crime incidences and crime issues in South Africa. They also publish data sets alongside their journal, so this platform had to suddenly cope with the data sets being published. So it really gave us very good experience about how is OJS, does it work, and what does it cost? And just to give you a very quick figure out there for you just to get an idea. And we're not talking about staff costs. We're not talking about the editorial cost. We're not talking about our training cost, because we feel you get that anyway in your institution, and we as ASAF give it to you anyway, and we don't want to load on that. And I know there's a lot of criticism out there that says you can't reason like that. Well, we do. And we've worked out for the 6 journals, if they would have paid us, it would have cost them 5,000 Rand per annum to host the journal onto that platform. And it's really the direct cost of the Hetzner platform that we are actually hiring down in Cape Town. So just to give you an idea how easy it actually is. And it's about leadership, and it's to get your hands dirty and to get in there. And it's also about support. We've learned a lot of lessons, and our biggest red flag that we had is we didn't have IT support. But I'll tell you a solution we have there. I mentioned a little bit earlier that we also have article processing charges that we are monitoring. Just this morning I checked my emails, and there was a listserv, and they're asking around, so what do international institutions accept as article processing charges? And they said it was about $1,500. So if you translate that into rands, it's almost 21,000 rands. And I was thinking that South African researchers will drop dead, because I think sometimes from the whole research output funding they get, maybe they'll get about between 10 and 20,000 for their research project into their department. So to be depleted by article processing charges, that's quite something. But I think what is worrying for me is if we look at the journals, which I've listed there. So the one is non-sponsored journals, but commercial. So it's commercial open access journals. And we have about 3 or 4 publishers in South Africa that's commercial open access publishers. So they still make the monies, and plus, because they still have to cover a number of costs. And there's journal A and B, and you can see how it varies. 1,075 rands, excluding VAT, per A4. So how many pages in an article, in a research article? 10? Sir? So there you go. So they were already at about 10,000 plus VAT. So we get to about 15,000 per article. There's 5,000 times 10. Gives you 50,000 per article. And then I think, I'm not so sure that this is going to be sustainable in the long run, even for South Africans and for South African editors and journals. And then you do get those journals that are sponsored by societies. And you can see it make the world of difference to the article processing charges, because they get half subsidized by the society and the other half they have to get from other resources. So that starts to look better. And then, of course, you get fully sponsored journals, which is 0. South African Journal of Science is a fully sponsored journals. Just want to say, in the 10 years that the journal has been reporting to me, we have not received any increase from the Department of Science and Technology to run that journal. So we had to think cleverly, and we dance like a hot cat on a hot plate. Every 3 to 4 years, we have to review our initial decisions about the journal and look at new things to do as such. We spoke about the peer review of journals. We have published already agricultural, social sciences, religion, health, law, humanities, journals that we have reviewed. They're open, they're accessible. Had a lot of criticism in the beginning when we did it, where editors asked us, how can you do this? And put it openly. Please, we don't want to taint our profile, etc. But as we're going along, is that we get a lot of remarks from editors as well to say, please, can you review my journal? I'm really at a crossroad with this journal. I actually don't know where to go or where's the problem. So these are very large operations of ours, and we can only do them in 5-year cycles. So it's a very big wheel that we have to turn to feed the system, because this system that also feeds the CLO South Africa platform. It's also these panels that evaluate them. So currently under review, and which we hope will be published by the end of the year, beginning next year, is Engineering and Architecture. There's 15 journals in that group. Humanities 2, that's Visual and Performing Arts, there's 10 journals. Communication Information Science, there's 14 journals. And then the new panels that has been established is in Education, Politics, Mathematics and Science. And that will mean that we're very close to the 300 and odd journals to have been evaluated. And then we start again, because I think it's very important. I can see from our initial evaluations, especially in humanities, the language and linguistics one, there was a very, I think that the humanities and social sciences journals are going through quite a number of challenges in South Africa. They do not publish regular. They are not very tight on the governance and the management of their journals. So it will be interesting after all our recommendations to see what they will do with the next round of journals. You've heard we are a Director of Open Access Journal Ambassador. We're an ORG-ID Ambassador. We push very hard for that. We also a Crossref advocacies that we push that, because that's where your DOI comes from. And we subscribe to most of its services, so we have hands-on experience of what does it mean and what does internationalization mean and professionalism of your actual journal. It really makes the difference in terms of offering these services, but we have to lead by example. So our strategic objective 3 is then to promote visibility and impact of South African research through publication of South African Journal of Science. We think that this journal is the gold standard of journal publishing and how a journal should look like when it publishes online and open accessible. We have come a long way in terms of E and E only. You can imagine that we have members and they're all grey heads. They're used to paper-based journals. A lot of criticism when we went E only. They say, how can you do that? I like my journal right there on my desk. I want to see it. And we just couldn't. As said, we don't get any increase from the department for the publishing of this journal. I think then progressively over a number of years, I think we actually get less. So we discarded the print. We went E only. And I must say, and I must add, that if you go E only with your journal, that there are a number of other things that you now have to think about. We had 600 subscriptions to our journal. We currently have electronic subscriptions, 22,000. So that is just how it exploded, and it's out there, and we push this journal towards our readers and our authors to read and to use, etc. And it definitely has its advantages. So in the last year, we have focused on openness, more openness towards our processes. In terms of transparency, visibility, accessibility, searchability, and interoperability. We worked very hard about that. And quality, we keep on pushing for quality. We currently have a rejection rate of 95%. We still publish about 86 research articles per annum, plus a load of other value-added things into the journal, like book reviews, obituaries, or comments to the editor, or letters to the editor, or short commentaries, etc. So it's not just only the research articles, and it really has proved to be quite valuable. We have quite a dynamic editorial team. We have 10 associate editors with the editor-in-chief, with the editing manager, where we really push this journal. Very important, we have to show impact and value in terms of this very general multidisciplinary journal, which is quite problematic as well, to have a multidisciplinary journal. Because somebody would rather put an article towards South African Journal of Chemistry than to South African Journal of Science. So we have to compete amongst all the other subject-specific journals for multidisciplinary articles as such. Then editorial, looking at the best practice. As indicated, we have put our big toe into the water of open peer review. What we found is in our policy, it says that we will only publish new research that hasn't been published anywhere else. And then we noticed that now there are subject repositories. So what researchers do is they put it in the subject repositories first. They solicit a round of comments, reviewing, so to speak. Then they would incorporate that into their article, and then they will submit it to the South African Journal of Science to be published. And then we had to change our policy to say, okay, right, we embrace that, but then when you submit again to us, you've got to show us what were the comments, how you changed that, and then it will still go through our double-blind review process. We have also set out to interview questionnaire 2 weeks ago, whereby we asked our authors what would they think about if we published the reviewers' names on the actual article of that of the manuscript, and if we send out the article for review to include the author's name and not to withhold that like in a double peer review project. So we had a whole fruit salad of comments. We'll work through those, but we did take our first step to say those in repositories plus their reviews can be submitted for further review into our journal. So we'll embark on this process. We'll see how quick we can move with that, but we have to be very sensitive about what our authors and our users of the actual journal will allow us to do. That is a thing, but sometimes you push them just a little bit further. We've added a lot of tools to our journal. All the bells and whistles you can find is on there, and that also has proved to be quite valuable. I think what was very pleasing for me and Ina, because Ina started the pilot project of the 5 journals, we were on OJS2. And we had no IT support. And again, because of our financial position at ASAF, we decided to go away from Scholar 1 and to publish our journal on OJS3. So we are right now in the process to migrate from OJS2 to OJS3 with these 5 journals, to put our own journal onto OJS3, and then we'll support all 6 the journals then equally in terms of what we have decided into the academy. So we're very excited about that particular road, and that will also broaden our experience further. As said, when you go e-only, there are massive things that you have to consider and that you have to bring about. We had to work on, because we had our own website, we had to work very hard on that website, and that also was time consuming, and also just eating up all the little bit of funding we did have. Because that's one thing of OJ is it produces its own website automatically. You don't have to have a separate one from your open journal management system. But I think what was very valuable to us is that we started with some alternative metrics, article level metrics right there at the bottom. So a particular article, you could actually see it was viewed 16 times. The PDF was downloaded 286 times. There were 233 EPUB downloads and then 231 XML downloads. Very interesting enough, you know, your EPUB format is the one that you use on your tablet and on your cell phone, and it's very expensive for us to produce. And we had a peace of mind at one stage to say, okay, right, in this whole spectrum of not having enough funds to do these things, should we not cancel the possibility of EPUB? And once we now have installed this, we're singing a different song, you can imagine. We've decided no. These things are extremely important for whichever user, and of course your XML are extremely important for your robots, etc., to actually harvest your things. Distribution and marketing, it's on another level, and we took it to that level. Indexing and harvesting, SAJS is the Director of Open Access, has a seal of approval there. It's indexed by CLS South Africa. It's on Sabinet. It has a impact factor. It's on the citation index of Web of Science. It's also indexed in Science Open. It's on Scopus. So that's what we're pushing for, and we can actually see the results thereof. Our fourth strategic objective is to promote awareness among science. We have Quest magazine, that's for grade 11 to 12 learners. We have a print run of 13,000 per issue. We had to half it due to financial constraints. But now our outreach have to be different because we have to still reach schools. Very exciting project. DST is also giving more profile and prominence to science awareness, science communication, science outreach. So we hope under that remit we will take it to the next level. So just very quickly, I just want to show you some results of our study that we've done on journal, book and conference publishing of the last 10 years. We took the last 10 years and we looked at what happened with the work that we did and with the policies in which we operate. What happened? So we commissioned CREST in 2015 to say, okay, this is an opportune time. Because as from January 2016, the research output policy will change and will be good for us to take stock to see what's happening. On the one hand side, but on the other hand, for us in the program, we've now worked with the 10 recommendations. You can see what we've done. We've done a lot of things. So now we have to ask ourselves, are we still going to do the same for the next 10 years? Or we are going to do a little bit of the sameness and then diversify in terms of other strategies. So that's also a very strategic document for us in Scholarly Publishing Program to see what is it that we'll be doing. So there you go. So you can see that one thing that the research output policy brought about is a massive increase in the research output of South Africa. Amazing. It is really massive. If you think that in 1995 there were only 5,000 units. And if you look at the first one, 2005, there were just over 6,000. So in a 10-year period, the research output increased only by 1,500 units in a 10-year period. But now if you take from 2005 to 2014, it has increased in its threefold. It's now already standing just below 16,000. So that is really because of the policy and pushing people to publish and having a reward system in place. Across all three categories of research output, being journals, conference proceedings and books, you can see there's been an increase over the number of years. It will be interesting in the next 10 years to see what happened to books, because now in the new policy there are prominent recognition for book publishers and book chapters. So we expect that that will grow more rapidly in the next 10 years than it actually did during this particular period. But that's really a result of the research output policy, that it has in threefold increased our research output. Journals, of course, still the biggest portion of the research output in South Africa. So let's just look very quickly at what happened to journals. If we look at where did South African researchers publish, 62% of them published in Web of Science indexed journals. So remember, for this study, we only consulted Web of Science and not Scopus, for that matter, because Scopus was not part of the previous research output policy accredited index. So it's just the Web of Science. So that's large, 62% in the so-called international journals. 35% of our research output still locally, and then 9% into the international bibliography of social sciences. So that's a proportion. The biggest growth we saw in IBSS and not really in the rest, but I think it's quite significant. The question we have to ask is, of the 62% where South African researchers publish, which of those articles are available to South Africans? And that's what we'll have to establish in our report, because that will touch upon about commercial publishers, etc., and the big deals of Science Direct, Wiley, etc., to see now, after this period of cancellations, do South Africans still have access to the research that they've conducted? That's an interesting question. What is quite significant, and this is also important in terms of government and the funding that they've provided for particular subject fields like the SKA, high energy physics, in health, etc. It's how did collaboration change? Did it change? It did quite phenomenally. If you look at the bottom row, And if you just look at the width of the actual colours there, so that's no collaborations, that's single authorship 2374. If you look at the yellow parts, it's collaboration within an institution where colleagues multidisciplinary work across with each other as well. It's part of that. You can see some growth, slowly growth has taken place there. And then if you look at national collaboration, and that is the 369 that you have there, you'll see that has even increased over the 10-year period from 1,332 to 3,691. So that has doubled. But what is very interesting to see is if you actually look at the collaborations outside, the international collaborations that has taken place, and you will see the growth has been there phenomenally. So that is very good for us because in our previous study there were almost no collaboration amongst authors or researchers in South Africa or even internationally. Single authorship is still dominant in humanities and arts like religion, languages and social sciences. But at the other extreme we did find that collaborative publishing was more prevalent in agriculture, chemical sciences and the biological sciences. So those were the subject fields coming out. Citation indicators of journals in Web of Science. So those are the South African journals which are indexed in the Web of Science. Very interesting, there are only about 4 journals who had an impact factor higher than 1. So that is South African Journal of Botany, South African Medical Journal, Cardiovascular Journal of Africa, African Journal of Marine Science. They were just about 1 and above. Then we have a couple under 1, like for instance Water South Africa, South African Journal of Science. So you can see that South African journals, despite all the efforts, are still very low in terms of its journal impact factor. And if we say why do they still have such low citation scores, it's because that these journals are being produced by South African affiliated authors, that's one reason, and that although these journals are indexed in the Web of Science, the majority of them remain local journals serving local scholarly communities. And I think that's a very important finding for us. I spoke a little bit about unethical practices and how does it influence or how does it taint our reputability in international global science. I think this is amazing statistics that we saw. So South Africa is now in a position, if we look at the top 10% cited worldwide articles, South Africa occupies 7.1%. If we look at the 1%, top 1% cited worldwide, South Africa occupies 0.6% of that percentage. So our research are very highly acclaimed, and it has quite a high profile in terms of the system worldwide as such. So this was a very interesting finding that we had in our study as such. High-level demographic trends. In 1990, there were about 10% of the articles published by female, currently 32%. Published by black authors in 1990, it was 3.5%. Currently, it's 32%. And the scientific papers published by authors above the age of 50, it has stayed pretty stable from 1998 till date. And we expect in the next couple of years it will start declining. So I think that's also very interesting in terms of the system as such. Books and book chapters, and I'm almost done. I just have a couple of slides just to quickly whiz through. You can see there has been a huge increase in terms of books and books chapters. Unique book titles from 33 to 162. Unique chapters in books from 98 to 964. That's a massive increase. Conference proceedings, there has been a huge increase in the application or the submittance of conference proceedings for accreditation purposes. But you can see in the lower bar, those are the ones being accepted. So you see there's still a lot being actually submitted, but not many of them actually accepted for accreditation purposes. Which is quite problematic. We've done those evaluations for 2 years. It's a massive job, and not too sure whether it only generates a 0.5% unit in terms of the policy. So we have to think and see what is it that we're going to do about those particularly and what our recommendations would be there. So definitely, what is my final remarks? In less than 20 years, South Africa has moved up from a performance level from below international to actually to an international level. This is largely driven by the DHET policy output. If we consider the new research output policy, I think our observations are that we are putting the framework under a lot of pressure, and we're asking questions about the long-term sustainability of the research output policy and the funding the DHET is giving. So that's quite concerning because we're just increasing. I don't know if you've seen, there's a new policy on creative output as well. So that's yet another thing. And then if we have more books, and that's a very large unit with quite some heavy subsidy and funding, it will definitely cut that cake into far smaller slices as such. Because of the publish and perish, we are seeing some symptoms of some predatory and unethical practices, and we need to do some action right there. And we still want to make a case that there must be effective mechanisms to evaluate the journal, books, and conference proceedings applications. We're not doing it anymore, but we think that the same hand that does the policy should not evaluate the actual applications. And we still think that those two functions should be separate, but we'll formulate some recommendations around that. Just some policy considerations. We'll have to think about perhaps a list of accredited scholarly book publishers. It seems that we are seeing some things coming out there that we can actually do that. We have to advise the DHET on these unethical practices. And then the conference proceedings, should they still be recognized? And then recommendations to the accredited indexes of the framework. Because the quality control measures between the indexes are not good, we are asking some questions about some of these indexes because it seems that those journals where the unethical practices come from are actually indexed in those indexes. So that's another thing we have to consider. Final remarks is we're busy with deep analysis of all these results. And it will not just be a bibliometric relay of what's happening currently, it will actually be far more than that. And then for the librarians in the room, I think this might be some good news, and even for researchers in South Africa, as I've made a business case to both departments of science and technology and higher education technology to recommend national site licenses for at least some of the databases to counter act against all this cancellations, etc. It has been approved by both ministers now, and it's now for the Department of Higher Education and Training to actually act upon that business case and the recommendations being made in there. So I think there's progress, very slow, but I think now the work actually starts. To make a business case is one thing. To actually implement such an initiative, I tell you, it's another thing. If you ask these librarians, they will tell you, which databases, why those databases, etc., etc. Not this one and not that one. So we're in for some heavy debate here, but I'm just glad that it has been approved by both departments. We're busy with a study on incentives for collaborative research because we have these papers that has 3,000 authors, and according to our current rewarding system, they're not rewarded or acknowledged or accredited for those large collaborations. We're almost done with the study. We have just completed our survey to DVCs of research where they had to answer some questions, and we'll see if we can extrapolate some recommendations for policies and for the systems as such. And then at the end of November, we'll have a South African EU strategic part. We're in a strategic partnership with them. It's a dialogue facility whereby the DST, with the help of ASAF, will have a 2-day workshop, and where after we have commissioned some people to write up a framework for open science in South Africa. So once we have the framework, we'll understand the work that needs to be done to have a far broader and larger openness in terms of the science system as such. So that is quite exciting for us as well. And then our Africa Open Data Platform, the one which Ina talked about, is where we look at Africa and what are they publishing there. Open accessible, open data, what infrastructures do they have in place. We work very closely with DST, who have big bilaterals and multilaterals with other African countries. Very interesting what we see at the moment is that the SKA project reaches across 8 other African countries. And where those African countries, they have Academy of Sciences in place, they have a NRF equivalent in place, they're now busy with open data sets and they're working together on the SKA. So we can see that all these large projects, the stimulation it brings in Africa, and once we connect those dots, it's massive what's actually happening on the Africa continent, and it's not so dark and so. But I think the data is very hidden for other countries to see. Big problem in Africa is the repatriation of data, and how one has to actually work with policies and government to ensure that data does not leave the country and that it's always available for that particular country. So I thank you. I hope that has given you a broad overview of scholarly publishing in South Africa, the work we do and where we're heading for the next 10 years. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, have you got any comments, questions for Suzanne, please?
Hi, Suzanne. Just a quick comment on ORC IDs. There's a workshop in Gauteng tomorrow regarding ORC IDs, and a team from ICS are attending that workshop. So we will be supporting and implementing ORC IDs into our network very shortly. Thanks.
I'm not sure what I'm saying now, but I'm going to say it, and maybe the penny will drop, and I'm looking into Ina's brown eyes to please help me out on this one. I know that there's a software that institutions have to download to make sure that there's interoperability between the repository and the org ID and. Come on, Ina. So please, Mr. IT, will you just ask them, they call it a particular software, AP? The API software, please. Yes, that's right. And you know, it's quite challenging for institutions to actually implement that and to have the IT support. So please, Mr. IT, I know you will be able to sort it out. I'm just flagging it for you. Thank you. But that's great news. Thank you so much.
There's a statement from you towards the end of the talk about conference proceedings,
Yes.
and whether they should continue or presumed to be subsidized. And you made the statement about possible exceptions of engineering and IT.
Yes.
Why would they be seen to be deemed to be not to be excluded? continue to be
Yes.
supported, I guess.
Yes. I think we need to interrogate that results of the study, particularly to see why those two subject fields as opposed to the others. In sort of in our discussions with these groups, and in terms of also the work that we did in terms of evaluating these different subject groups, it seemed that those two subject groups, that is the main vehicle where through they actually publish. So they made a big thing about it. And if we analyze the data as well, we can see the type of things that they have submitted in comparison, say, with journal articles, etc., or books. So it's not cast in stone, it's just quick things that we could see very quickly out of the results. But I mean, that is still subject to a lot of discussion, and to make sure that, whatever we recommend, that we're right.
Thank you. And just a point of clarity, when you've given us the background on the South African Journal of Science, you made a statement on the number of articles published. Was it 6, 16, or 60?
It was 86 research
86
articles per annum.
Per annum.
We have 6 issues per annum.
Okay, thank you.
That's right. Thank you.
While you were presenting on the impact of the policy, I realized that by 2005, we were about 6,000. Then by 2014, it was about almost 16,000.
That's right.
But along the line, you see to fall a bit, though which may not be that significant. But I just want to know, did you bother to know why the down drop and picking up again? Did you try to ascertain why?
Yes, it
dropped
was
at the point?
2012, and we also saw that it went for almost a ditch, and then it went upwards again. We're not too sure why that happened, and it will need some interrogation to see why was that that actually happened. Not too sure about that, but there must be something that has happened in the system to actually clarify that. But we've also noticed that, so thank you for that comment.
Just a brief comment on the question. It's a big question about why IT or science and engineering get their, can publish their conference proceedings. Because I wanted to do the same with the first conference I organized. And when I bore down to the main issue, it seems, I don't know whether that's the practice really across the board, but it seems as if the articles that's being delivered at a conference are pre-reviewed before the conference. So it's already gone through the process. Once you deliver the article, it's already accepted for publication. That is the answer that I got. So. Yeah.
Yes, and I agree with that, because when we developed sort of the criteria when evaluating conference proceedings, it's quite problematic, because what you'll find is that the same person that organized the conference actually accept the papers for that conference, etc. So it becomes almost, again, a very closed process. So one of our questions were, what were the roles of the different organizations? So some of these conferences would have an organizing committee, they would have an editorial or a content, they've got so many different names, content review, and then if there's something like that, what process that they follow, because now you've got to state that. And then we've got to understand that it was not only the abstract that was peer reviewed, we have to understand what peer review processes followed after that. And that is problematic. And I think that's where the conference proceedings actually fail. While in computer science and engineering, there's a very clear process. If you look at the IEEEs in engineering and what they do there, and even the chemistry, etc., there are very strict and particular things that they follow, and they're very open about it, and you can at least gauge and sense that there's been a good process involved to open it up, to make sure that the things are dealt with on different levels, and at which stage did the peer review actually take place. Sometimes in conference proceedings, they will take the best papers, they will put them through review, and they have to still change them, and then they publish them. But some of them are just as they look at the abstract and say, this is great, and they put it through, and that's very problematic. Yeah.
Just a brief question. Thank you for your presentation, Susan. You talk about rejection rates and so on, which is basically part of metadata. But that is not available on the site. I think we must just be clear about that. That is information that editors and blah, blah, blah can get. Because I do not think that, as far as I know, that data is available to everybody that visits the site, or is it available? Will it be available at OJS, for example?
It is available. I see Ina's nodding. It is. It actually tells you how long it takes from you accept a manuscript until when it's submitted to the system, when it's accepted, and when it's published. You can withdraw that statistics.
Yeah, but also rejection
and then rejection. Ina, yes, rejection. I
Really?
thought so. Yes, it can. Yeah, it will tell you. Yeah, but what? Yeah. Yeah. But what editors can do is take that statistics and bring it to the front page of the actual, on your landing page of your journal, to say, this is the statistics. Remember, that is now sort of at the back end, which only you can see. So what you need to do is just do some nice pictures and whatever, and bring it to the fore and show your authors what is it that your journal does. Yeah. Yeah, you will.
So my comment is about the impact factor of the South African journals. I can't help but notice most of the impact factors are around 1, and many of them are below 1. Yet when you apply for NRF rating or promotions or anything of that sort, impact factors in high quality journals with high impact factors are needed. It's almost as if the incentive is not to publish in South African journals. Can you comment on that?
Oh yes, and many higher education institutions in South Africa actually has it in their policies to say you will not publish in South African journals. You will publish in international journals, and I think that's where Ina's question comes from. What do you consider as international journal? What is your definition of international journal? I always ask that. And to put a threshold there, and they do, some of them say, if you're in biochemistry, it must be 3+, impact factor. And I think that will be the things that we have to change when we go with open science, to say, okay, what constitutes an international journal, and just to get away from these impact factors, and then to put different criteria into place. What do you consider as a quality journal, or what do you consider as where should you publish? It's highly controversial, not just nationally, but internationally as well. But those things are getting more stringent, and I've noticed them, and I mean, even the research-intensive universities, one of the top 5, I mean, most of their researchers publish in local journals, not necessarily in so-called international journals. And it's highly problematic, and it caused quite a gavolt, you know, but it's policy now, and they're phasing it into the next 3 years. So we know that that's happening. So therefore, from academy point of view, it is very challenging, because we try and strengthen the local system, the local journals, and what's happening there, because we still believe that our journal serves a particular stakeholder group. Yes, we understand it might not be for interest for international researchers, but perhaps for some of them, but not for the broader international stakeholder group. But we certainly have an obligation to publish South African research, because I tell you, the so-called international journals does not necessarily have interest in what we research as part of our problems and what we have to do. I think we have another stakeholder group we have to address. But now to switch that around, that's quite problematic. I love to say to people what you consider as international journals. I mean, what make some journals published in America and in Europe international? I think they're actually regional journals. Exactly. You know, so I think it needs a very large debate and a mind switch as to what is international, and we need to change the perceptions, even of our own institutions, of locally journals. But then we as editors have to up our game and to get those journals top. Yeah.
In order to get approved by the Department of Higher Education and Training, you have to prove that you are international. So all the 300 and how many journals we have in South Africa, they have to prove that they've got international people on the editorial board, that there's international reviewers and so on. But the thing is that we must become more international. That's the issue. We must continue our internationalizing of our scholarship, our disciplinary focuses and so on. So that is a continuing process. Some journals stop. After they got the Department of Higher Education, they stopped with this internationalization, and that should continue.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to Suzanne. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for a great paper, greatly appreciated. And Faith, I'll just give you a token of appreciation, please. Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, we come on to our next speaker for today, and that is Bronwyn Rasman of EBSCO Host. Now, her topic Bronwyn is going to speak to you about is Folio, the Future of Libraries is Open. Now, there's a brief biography on Bronwyn. Bronwyn Rasman has been employed by EBSCO Information Services for the last 9 years, and is currently a senior regional sales manager focusing on academic and government markets in Southern Africa. Bronwyn has a BCom honors degree in marketing management from the University of Johannesburg, and she also belongs to the Golden Key International Honors Society for Academic Achievement. She has spent the last 9 years actively engaging with the market in the discovery realm and prioritizes content and the accessibility thereof. Well, in the spare time as well, Bronwyn enjoys mountain biking, snowboarding, reading, and design. Ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome to Bronwyn. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to talk from an EBSCO point of view, I am an EBSCO employee. I have been employed at EBSCO for the last 9 years. And EBSCO is not a publisher. So EBSCO creates the EBSCO host platform. We've created EBSCO Discovery Service. And what we are is we are actually the biggest driver to open access content and open access full text on the web after Google. So we are a big driver, we're a big supporter of open access. And through that, we have to partner with the community. We have to partner with libraries globally because our success is derived through library success. And what EBSCO has done is they've partnered with a couple of different organizations to develop an open source library services platform called Folio. And Folio stands for The Future of Libraries is Open. And really what that means for you as researchers, as libraries, is because it's open source, it's free. And that means that organizations like yourselves have more money to put into what's actually important. And we believe that research is what's actually important. Being able to develop research, being able to publish research, and being able to put it out there for the global community to engage in. So EBSCO, as an organization, has decided to turn it on its head a little bit. So as much as my conversation is about open, it's not really about open access, it's about open source. And really I'm trying to just invoke a conversation about where perhaps we are going as organizations in the future and how we as EBSCO can partner with you as the University of KwaZulu-Natal and your and fellow colleagues in the market. So what EBSCO is doing is we're actually providing the funding for the library services platform. It's cloud-based, which means it's completely new generation technology. It's all in the cloud. There are no servers. You don't have to host anything. You don't have to install any software, and it's updated automatically. It's fully featured, so basically it has everything that you currently engage in with your ILS or integrated library system, but it's extensible and modular. So basically what it means is we are providing a cell phone, essentially, if I can put it in the most generic terms, it's a cell phone platform, and then you can download your Facebook or your Gmail or your Google Maps, and they're developed by lots of different organizations. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because we want the University of KwaZulu-Natal to get involved, to start telling us and to tell the partners what it is that you would like to see. How do we talk to your repositories? How do we talk to different systems that you have in place that are unique to your university and you wouldn't get at other institutions? So this is what EBSCO is doing. Because what we've found, and it's the same that goes for the big deal, the big package, we found that software providers are closing libraries in. They're making libraries buy everything from them. So you would buy your catalog system, all the different modules that would be supporting that system, your discovery, all of those items through one institution. And we're finding that it leaves our customers no room to move. It leaves our customers with no room to be able to say, I don't like this, it doesn't work for me, can I choose something else? And it's the same, and what we are finding is people want more choice. They want to have choice as to where they publish. They want to have choice as to where they want their content accessible. And they want the systems to work with the times. But the biggest underlying thing is they want to lower the cost. And with everything that I've heard today, it's all about the cost. Where's the cost coming from? Where's the money coming from? Who's it going to? And what we are trying to do in supporting open access is being able to give back to the universities, give back to the organizations that we work with and work for the choice and say, the money's in your hands. Choose what you want to do with it. And by doing something like this, EBSCO is saying, cut the cost that you're spending on systems and go with something open access. Not necessarily open source, but open access. Use the skills that you have in the organizations to develop what you're actually looking for. So it's a community. It includes the open library environment, which are academic institutions in the United States. They developed, I don't know if you know, Koali Ole. we've partnered with them. We were going to develop Koali, but then we realized there were some limitations with Koali. So EBSCO is funding Koali, but then we're putting the funding into Folio as well. Index Data, they're based in Europe. They're the technology partners, so they're the ones that are actually developing the code behind the system. Cersei Dynex is an international organization that's represented by UKS in South Africa. They supplying support services, hosting services to support your institution. Bywater is in Australia. They support Koali Ole, and then of course EBSCO. The community is growing, and what's nice about this is you see very international, huge universities that are engaging with this community, that are getting involved, that are contributing to the dialogue, that are saying these are things that we want to see, these are things that we want you to develop. There's a couple of others. And we would like UKZN to be involved as well. We have over 3,000 librarians have signed up to participate, which means they are engaging in that conversation. They're saying, at my university, we want this. At my organization, we want that. So we are talking to them. We have community forums, we have a wiki, and we have all this technology that you can engage with to help us develop it. As I mentioned, it's modular. So you can choose specific applications that you are interested in. So you don't have to take the whole package. So what we are saying is it's completely open. You take what you need. So if you want an IR system or a repository for a specific type of data set, for example, we can develop it through the partners to give you a resource that you can actually use. And it's open source, so then it's free. And then you put it in place. We're at the point where we've developed all the base applications through our partners. So all the things that you would traditionally see in an ILS are already available, okay? We're busy beta testing it, acquisitions, cataloging, circulation, etc., etc. But what we are doing is we're making it extensible. So if there's something particular that you would like to see happen, we can make this available in Folio. And I'm talking a general we, it's not an EBSCO we, it's through all the partners, okay? Susanne spoke about this a little bit. You have a platform of choice. Everything is API driven, okay? So that stands for Application Programming Interface. Everything that you touch these days is basically on an API. So everything on your cell phone is an API. All the apps on your cell phones are driven through APIs. And it really is the technology behind the systems that are in place. Anyone can build apps, and it's completely open, which means anybody can access and engage with any of the code, any of the source material behind the system, and you can manipulate it and make it your own. The hosting would be by the university if you wanted to. You could engage with other organizations to host it for you. So it gives you that choice. Okay. So we are providing hosting services, but so are other organizations in the industry. So for example, Cersei Dynex. They're providing full service and support for Folio, and they're providing it at a decreased cost. So they mentioned Elma over here. Elma costs an organization a huge amount of money. I know that the University of KwaZulu-Natal has WMS, or Wheelchair Management Service, from OCLC. These systems cost a lot of money. And when we talk about anything, it's all about driving costs down, because you have to do more with the money that you're given as an organization. You have to make your RAND work harder, because something happens and our RAND is suddenly down and we now have less to work from. So by doing things like this, EBSCO is actively engaging with the market and saying, come, let's help you, let's work together, let's create a community. We don't publish anything, so we don't have any open access that we can particularly do, but we can do this for you. Well, I'm going backwards, sorry. So this is Bywater. So what EBSCO is going to help you with if you wanted to, we'll help you implement it if you want, we'll help you host, service and support it, we'll help you train, and then we have all these data centers around the world that we will put in place for redundancies, for networking, for connectivity if you need it. I'm going through these quite quickly. And what this means is there's more innovation and there's more involvement. So it's not an organization saying to a university, this is what you have to have and this is how it's going to work. It means that you can come back and say to us, these are the things that work for us, these are the things that we want, and we actually don't want all this other stuff that comes with it. It lowers your costs, which means you have more money to spend on the things that are important, the things like your content, journal subscriptions, publishing, etc., and it means more choice. It's based on the Apache 2 license, which is the most permissive license. It's the most open license. It means you have access to absolutely everything. If you want the binary code to start working with, you just take it and off you go. Our timeline, we are already into phase 1. We're launching the apps next year in I think it's probably March next year. We're busy beta testing everything at the moment. And then from there, we're going to start developing the extended apps. So, for example, if you want specific repositories, supporting different data sets, etc., etc. This is just a comment from the Dean of Libraries at Texas A&M. So it means a partnership between libraries and vendors, which was what we want to see, and being able to work together. And what I'm trying to do today, so as long as my colors match, the orange matches, but really what I'm trying to do today is to encourage an engagement, to encourage a dialogue from the University of KwaZulu-Natal with the Folio project, in partner with EBSCO. You can go onto folio.org, you can sign up to the wiki, you can sign up to forums, you can speak to colleagues all over the world, see what they're doing with it. And really what we want to do is to actually see the University of KwaZulu-Natal join the community and to get involved and help us change the paradigm that we're sitting in at the moment and help us partner for the long term. So it's a very short presentation. Thank you.
Yes, that's short and sweet. Thank you very much, Bronwyn. Greatly appreciated for your time and the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, any comments? I know there'll be lots of queries from Bronwyn. Please, you're welcome to actually raise with her right now. Thanks.
So what support will you be able to give in terms of migration, if one has to migrate perhaps from your current catalog to this new open source catalog? Because that's always the biggest challenge and headaches and so on. What do you envisage to support, how to support?
So EBSCO will do it all for you. So we will actually host or manage that migration for you if you wanted us to. You could go to Cersei Dynix, you could go to Bywater. If you wanted to do it yourself, you could do that too. So it puts it into your hands. But yes, EBSCO would be able to do that for you.
I would like to know, there's already existing open source software packages. You've mentioned IRs, so I'm thinking of DSpace. Why would one go with an IR from Folio instead of DSpace? And what would it do for upskilling people, individuals on the continent, if they continue to rely on a third party to host it for them?
So there are basically two questions in there. Okay, so the second question is, how are we upskilling? So, and how would something like this allow for the upskilling of people on the continent? So what we are doing is saying to you, let's say organization INA, saying to you, it's up to you. If you want us to help you, we can. If you want to do it yourself, we will offer you the support, we will provide you the training, and then you can take it from there if you wanted to. So we're giving an opportunity for people to empower themselves, to say, this is something I'm going to engage in. I think we have the capability for organizations to do it themselves, but we will walk next to you and help you. Then your second question is, why would you go for a system like the Folio IR if there is DSpace? You don't have to go with Folio's IR. You can go with DSpace, and we plug it into Folio. Because it's all open, and because it's about collaboration and about being able to be interoperable with different systems, you have the ultimate choice. You can say, I don't like what you have to offer me. I'm going to go with this, and you say that's fine. You can absolutely. We'll plug DSpace into Folio. You don't have to go with what we're offering. Okay.
All right, folks. Thank you, Bronwyn. Thank you very much indeed, ma'am. I would like to call upon Faith just to give you a little token of appreciation. Thank you. Come, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, we really had a very informative day today. And I would now like to call upon the head of our information services, Dr. Nontlana Ngobo, to actually move the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My work here is very easy. It's just to thank a number of people who have worked together to make sure that we have this very successful conference. We all know that if you work on any project, there has to be a number of people who work on it, who put effort into making sure that everything gets done. So we're going to acknowledge those people. I think first and foremost, we need to thank our speakers, Prof. Smith, Ina Smith, Susan Felsman, and Bronwyn Rasman. Thank you so much for your presentations. They were very informative. I'd like to thank also the DVC in his absence, Prof. Diresh Ramjaganath, for his excellent support of libraries. His one DVC that we've had was very, very supportive, and we really appreciate his support. We'd like to thank Joyce, our director, for her support as well. Would also like to thank a number of university departments like ICS, who are here. I see Vasu there, the corner. Thank you for your technical support that you provided us. And also thank you to corporate relations for the work that they also did. Would like to thank you, our guests. You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you so much for sitting patiently from, what time was it when you started? 9:30, 10 o'clock? Yeah, you've been very good. Thank you so much for your presence and also for participating as well. Would like to thank the organizing team. They look very nice and bright in their orange t-shirts. And some of us didn't get to have the t-shirts. Thank you so much, guys, for all the hard work that you put into this open access week celebration. I can tell you that our celebration here at UKZN is drawing a lot of interest all over South Africa. I did mention this morning that I gave myself the liberty to send the link to the live stream to Liasa Online and to Helig Online, which is the Library and Information Services community in the country. And I've been getting a lot of very positive comments from all over the country. So thank you so much for the splendid work that you did. I'd also like to thank Dr. Pravesh Sukram, our program director, who's been directing the proceedings since the beginning of the proceedings this morning. And last, but certainly not the least, I'd like to thank the LIS department, which is Library and Information Services Department of UKZN Libraries. That's the department that's responsible for the financial aspect of everything that is happening today. So I'd like to give, well, I'd like you to give yourself and the departments and the people that I mentioned a big round of applause. Thank you.